So we have some breaking news that Justin Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland, the Liberal government, have recognized Bolivia's coup as legitimate. They haven't acknowledged that the current person holding the office as president is legitimate in that office, unlike Trump. But in general, Canada's Liberal government is supportive of this anti-Indigenous and anti-democratic and anti-socialist coup that we've seen in Bolivia. At the end of the day, Morales is still the duly elected and legitimate president. This hand-wringing about term limits or about irregularities is largely, if not exclusively, a construction by forces inside and outside Bolivia that want to tear down a democratic left regime in that part of the world, especially since Morales and his movement wanted to ensure that key resources like lithium were owned in the interests of the people of Bolivia instead of the interests of foreign mining companies, investors, and nations. That's why Evo Morales was forced out through a combination of military and thuggish violence. It has nothing to do with democracy. It has nothing to do with human rights. We've seen that. If it was about democracy and human rights, this coup would not be nearly as violent as it has been. And if it was about democracy and human rights, the opposition forces in that country would have taken up Evo Morales' offer of a totally new election. Morales won that election fair and square, but just in the interests of transparency, he said, let's do it again, and they rejected that offer. And you guys know why they rejected that offer, because Morales would have won again, and it would have been the end of their chance to get rid of him the only way they could, which was through an anti-democratic coup. That's the story. Justin Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland know all this, and they still choose to back this current regime. And the only reason they're taking a slightly different tone than Trump isn't because they actually have a different view than Trump. The whole reason is political. Justin Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland have put so much emphasis in their relationship to Indigenous people and human rights. And what we're seeing from this coup regime in Bolivia is that they've been attacking Indigenous people. They've been attacking Indigenous symbols. They've been, claiming that Indigenous people and Indigenous belief systems are satanic and that they are in juxtaposition to the Christian faith that Bolivia should be ruled by. All of this is in direct opposition to the narratives of Justin Trudeau, and so he has to distance himself. But we have to be really clear. You can draw a line between the disrespect Justin Trudeau has shown Indigenous people in Canada and the actions we're seeing in Bolivia, as well as the actions we're seeing from another Trudeau-Freeland ally, Bolsonaro in Brazil, who has also attacked Indigenous people and has used Christian fundamentalist language to help justify those actions. These are Trudeau's core allies in the region. They're his allies in the region, not because they're defenders of democracy and human rights, but because they are defenders of corporate interests. They are aligned with mining and logging and agricultural companies, and they are enemies to democratic socialist governments in places like Venezuela and Bolivia. That's what it's all about. Justin Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland's foreign policy is absolutely predicated on stopping democracy whenever democracy interferes with the power of Canada's global corporate interests. That is Liberal Party policy, even if they don't want you to know that. And of course, if Andrew Scheer was prime minister, there wouldn't be any major difference. There's broad policy agreements on foreign policy between Justin Trudeau and Andrew Scheer, or between the Liberal Party and the Conservative Party. But here in Canada, we have at least one party that's speaking out against what we're seeing in Bolivia, and that's the NDP. At first, it was mostly coming from individual MPs like Niki Ashton, Leah Gazan, Matthew Green, Don Davies, Alexandre Boulerice. Those aren't the only ones, but those are just the ones I can name off the top of my head, who all in various ways came out and condemned the coup, spoke about how Morales was the duly elected president of that nation, and in general aligned with progressive forces around the world, including people like Bernie Sanders and Jeremy Corbyn, to stand against what was happening in Bolivia. This lithium coup has never been about democracy and human rights. And if it's about democracy and human rights, it's about crushing democracy and crushing human rights. Because those things, guys, are inconvenient to profit. Democracy, it's an inconvenience. human rights, they're inconveniences, especially when we're talking about the human rights of Indigenous people. It's a long historic inconvenience to profit, whether it's in the lands of Bolivia or whether it was on the Canadian prairies. Private profit seeks to crush human rights whenever it needs to do so to perpetuate itself. And while it took a bit too long, we have confirmation that Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the NDP, is taking the correct stand here. And I want to underline what he said by reading out his recent tweet. This broke less than an hour ago. The worsening situation in Bolivia is alarming. Instead of supporting the self-proclaimed interim president that has a history of attacking Indigenous people, Canada must condemn the anti-democratic actions that led to this coup and are still getting worse. The Canadian government must support a new election that includes all parties. The gains Bolivia made under the Morales government in terms of the rights of Indigenous peoples, health, and development must not be lost, and the safety of Morales and his colleagues must be assured. That's a good statement. It didn't come as fast as I would like. It wasn't as strident in support of Morales as maybe some people would like. But Jagmeet Singh is showing that he is the only major party leader in this country willing to condemn human rights abuses and anti-Indigenous actions and anti-democratic actions in Latin America. That's the truth. Progressives need to realize the way Justin Trudeau acts and the way Chrystia Freeland acts in Bolivia, in Venezuela, in Brazil, in South and Central America broadly defined, shows just how little they respect democracy and just how far they would go to stop democratic socialist action if it endangered the profit motives of themselves and of those who they are aligned with. That's what's really troubling here. And it goes to show just how far they would go to stop meaningful efforts by Indigenous people and by the allies of Indigenous people to fight for true reconciliation and justice. This shows that when the chips really are down, Justin Trudeau will side with people who want to destroy Indigenous people, destroy Indigenous symbols, destroy Indigenous communities. Justin Trudeau doesn't like that as part of his image, but that's the logical conclusion. This is a very ugly time for Canada. Guys, we are the baddies right now. Our official government, our actual representatives on the global stage, we are the bad guys. And while there are voices in our country and our parliament, almost exclusively NDP voices, who are challenging this, our key officials on the global stage, whatever their progressive veneer, are the bad guys. That's Justin Trudeau and that's Chrystia Freeland. Canadians of any broad progressive mindset need to challenge this Trudeau government. They need to unite with forces fighting for human rights abroad. They need to continue to ensure that the NDP takes the right stand on issues like Bolivia, and they need to show support to the NDP when they do take those correct stands, because we need them to be a champion in this minority parliament for human rights, democracy, and equality at home and across the globe.